Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down one of the most overlooked factors in consistently finding elk, and that's understanding and using natural funnels when elk travel between habitats. Every elk herd on the mountain follows patterns shaped by food, safety, and comfort. They bed in one zone, feed in another, and travel between them almost daily, but they rarely wander randomly. The terrain itself, ridges, saddles, benches, and drainages, guides their movement. Over time, those same routes get used again and again, creating natural travel corridors that quietly funnel elk through specific terrain features. A lot of hunters don't pay enough attention to those natural pathways. They hunt where elk were, not where they're going. They glass wide basins, sit on sign, or walk timber edges without realizing that elk often pass through a single subtle pinch point they never notice. Learning to read and hunt those funnels can completely change how you approach an area. You might start anticipating elk instead of chasing them, and that single shift can turn low odds country into a reliable producer year after year. In this episode, we're going to break down what elk movement looks like between habitats, how to recognize funnels both on a map and in the field, and how to set up, play the wind, and hunt these areas effectively. If you're ready to stop guessing where elk might show up and start predicting it with purpose, this is how you do it. Every elk herd, whether in the mountains of Idaho or the breaks of Montana, lives by a simple rhythm: feed, rest, and survive. Understanding how and when they transition between those needs is the foundation for finding consistent travel routes. Elk are creatures of habit, but those habits shift with pressure, weather, and the season. Early in the year, their movements are driven by feed and shade. During the rut, they're driven by cows and dominance. After the rut, it's about recovery and safety. Across all those stages, one thing stays the same. They take the path of least resistance that still keeps them safe. When elk move between feeding and bedding areas, they rarely walk straight lines. They travel using the terrain to their advantage, often following the same contours that make sense to us as hunters. A narrow saddle between two ridges, a shaded bench cutting across a steep slope, or a timbered drainage connecting open feeding zones. All of those serve as natural highways for elk. They offer both cover and efficiency, letting the herd move while staying out of direct sight. Over time, those routes become worn-in travel corridors used year after year, often marked with rubs and poop and faint trails that seem to disappear into thick cover. What makes those corridors so valuable to us as hunters is that they exist in every landscape. Even in rugged backcountry terrain, elk still favor paths that minimize energy output and exposure. In heavily pressured units, you're often going to find that they use smaller, hidden versions of the same features. A finger ridge instead of a main one. A low saddle tucked behind timber instead of an open skyline crossing. Once you start recognizing how elk think about terrain, you're going to begin seeing these funnels everywhere. Timing also plays a massive role in how elk use these travel routes. At first light, herds move from open feeding areas toward shade and security. As the sun climbs and thermals rise, they slip into those funnels, moving quietly and efficiently. In the evening, the process reverses. They follow the same general paths downhill towards feed, usually with a headwind in their favor. During the middle of the day, bulls and small groups may still use those same corridors, especially in cooler weather or if they're changing bedding zones to adjust for the wind or sun exposure. Pressure changes everything though. In areas with heavy hunting traffic, elk start shifting their travel earlier or later, often under the cover of darkness. But the routes themselves rarely change completely. They just get used more cautiously. If you know where those funnels lie, you can set up along them at the right time of day and catch elk slipping through. The key to understanding elk travel behavior is realizing that funnels don't just connect feeding and bedding areas. They connect every part of an elk's life. From rut zones to escape routes to migration corridors, those terrain features act like arteries that move elk through their world. The hunter who learns to read and predict that movement becomes part of that rhythm instead of just chasing it. Finding natural funnels is about learning to see the mountain the way the elk do. It's not about luck or random encounters. It's about reading shape, slope, and cover until the land starts to make sense as a map of movement. When you study a topo map or you sit behind your glass, your goal is to find those narrow corridors where two or more habitats come together. Every elk herd has to move between food, water, bedding, and cover, and the easiest path between them almost always involves a terrain feature that quietly guides that travel. The best funnels are formed by combinations of elevation and topography. Saddles are a classic example. Those low spots between two ridges that allow elk to cross from one basin to another without exposing themselves on the skyline. Saddles don't have to be big or dramatic either. Some of the most productive ones are subtle, hidden in timber, or barely visible unless you're looking at the contour lines on a map. Elk use them because they make sense. Less climbing, less wind exposure, and more security. The same applies to benches that connect two sides of a drainage. Bulls often travel along those benches because they can move horizontally instead of climbing and descending constantly. When pressure rises, those benches become quiet, shaded paths that get used over and over again. Drainages are another key feature. Small, timbered cuts that run from one feeding area into thicker bedding zones act like covered highways for elk. Those routes let them travel unseen, maintaining consistent wind flow, and they almost always contain fresh sign, tracks, rubs, poop, and worn game trails that look like narrow elk-sized tunnels through the brush. If you find one of those drainages with sign leading both up and down the slope, you've likely found a major travel corridor. Sit on the line long enough, and you're going to eventually see movement. Transitions between vegetation types can also create subtle tunnels. Elk prefer to travel where visibility and cover balance out. Edges between dark timber and open grass, the fringes of old burns, or transition zones between aspens and conifer. Those edges give them the ability to move while staying hidden. On a map, you can often see them as contour or texture lines, but in the field they appear as small breaks where the forest opens or the slope angle shifts. Those are prime places to find trails cutting diagonally across hillsides, and they're often used by both bulls and cows at different times of day. One of the best ways to identify these areas is through e-scouting. When you're looking at satellite imagery or topo layers, trace the likely routes elk would take between feeding meadows, water sources, and bedding cover. You want to look for contour lines that pinch together and then open back up. Those are choke points. Pay attention to ridges that taper into drainages or finger out into benches. Those features naturally compress elk movement, and once you find them on the map, you can verify them on foot by looking for sign. In the field, finding funnels means slowing down and paying attention to the small details a lot of hunters walk right past. Look for narrow saddles with game trails crossing at angles, or rub lines that seem to follow a contour, or poop that forms a linear path rather than a scattered one. When you find a spot where multiple trails converge, you're standing in a natural intersection of elk movement. Mark it, study it, and think about where those trails are going to lead in both directions. Funnels don't just exist in isolation either. They're part of a bigger system of movement that connects everything elk need to survive. The hunters who become masters at reading terrain for funnels don't waste their time just wandering the country blindly. They move with purpose. They already know where elk are most likely to travel based on slope, vegetation, and elevation. Once you start identifying these terrain features instinctively, you're going to find yourself predicting movement hours before it happens. That's when elk hunting shifts from luck to skill. Finding a natural funnel is one thing, right? Hunting it effectively is another. The difference between watching elk move through a corridor out of range and getting a clean opportunity a lot of times comes down to how you position yourself. Funnels are powerful because they compress elk movement into predictable lines, but that advantage disappears if you're on the wrong side of the wind or set up without understanding how elk approach that feature. You have to think like water flowing downhill. Elk move through the path of least resistance, guided by the contour and the wind, and your position should take advantage of that natural flow. Start by determining how elk are likely to travel through the funnel at different times of day. In the mornings, they're usually going to be moving uphill towards bedding areas with the thermals flowing down earlier and then rising as the sun hits. In the evening, they're often coming back down towards feeding zones as the thermals start to drop again. If you set up on the wrong side of that equation, your scent will often betray you before they ever appear. Early mornings, when the thermals are still traveling downhill in the shaded sides, typically favors a setup that is going to be slightly below the travel route so that the scent is traveling downhill, right? As the sun starts to warm the slope, you're going to want to make sure that you're above those travel routes, right? Evenings favor setups below the route again, where falling thermals in the shade and the shadows are going to carry your scent downhill. The key here is always playing the wind line, not just where it is right now, but where it's going to be 30 minutes from now when the elk are actually moving through. Sun angle also matters. You don't want to be staring into the light as elk approach, and you don't want sunlight exposing your silhouette. So you've got to position yourself in the shade whenever possible, especially during the last 2 hours of daylight when elk movement peaks. Shade adds concealment and keeps your scent column more stable, right? Since temperatures shift less dramatically in cooler ground. Whether you're bow hunting or rifle hunting, having a shaded backdrop makes a massive difference in how well you blend in with your surroundings. Entry and exit are two of the most overlooked parts of a good funnel setup. Too many hunters ruin great ambush spots because they don't think about how to get in or out without blowing out the elk. You have to approach and leave with the same stealth as you'd use on a stalk. If you're hiking in before daylight, move quietly and avoid crossing the exact trail you expect the elk to use. If you're hunting evenings, plan an exit route that helps keep you out of the wind line and away from where elk will travel after dark. Try to treat every approach like you're already inside shooting range of the herd. You should leave no scent or sound behind that might tip them off for tomorrow. When it comes to positioning, begin slightly off the main trail, right? Being there is often better than being right on top of it. Elk rarely travel the exact same line every time, and if you're set up directly over their route, you risk being seen or winded. I like to stay at least 30 to 50 yards off the primary trail using brush and trees or terrain folds to break up my outline and hide, right? While keeping a clear shooting lane. This angle also helps you draw or raise your rifle with less chance of being caught. When you find a funnel with multiple intersecting trails, try to choose a position that covers the greatest number of those routes without exposing yourself. Give yourself a little space. The last part of positioning is thinking like a sniper, not a sprinter. Your job isn't to chase elk through the funnel, it's to intercept them. Once you're in position, just commit to it. Stay still. Trust the location you've chosen. It's tempting to move when nothing happens for an hour, but the elk that show up quietly are the ones you never hear coming. Patience kills more bulls in funnels than calling or covering ground ever will. Once you've learned how to position correctly, every funnel becomes a waiting game of wind, light, and timing, and that's when things start to come together. Even the best funnel in the world won't produce consistent results if you don't understand timing and wind. These two elements are what separates a well-planned ambush from a frustrating pattern of near misses. Elk movement through transition country follows predictable rhythms, but the window of opportunity is often narrow. You have to know when those animals are likely to be on their feet and how the air currents in the terrain behaves throughout the day. If you get either of those wrong, you're going to be sitting in the right place at the wrong time, wondering why the mountain feels empty. The biggest mistake a lot of guys make here is with timing, and it's assuming that the elk move only at dawn and dusk. While those are our prime windows, the timing of movement through funnels changes with season, temperature, and hunting pressure. Early in the fall, elk might linger in open feeding areas until the sun hits the ridge, then slip through a funnel between 8 and 9 in the morning. Later in the year, with colder temperatures and shorter days, they may bed later and feed earlier, shifting that window toward midday or early afternoon. The only way to learn this is through observation. You've got to glass, listen, and track, right? Once you identify the specific window when elk consistently use a funnel, you can then time your setups to meet them in that transition. Wind adds another layer of complexity here, right? And a lot of guys don't understand it. Thermals and prevailing winds interact differently in transitional country, especially around drainages and saddle. Cool air sinks, right? So anytime it's shady and cool, you're going to have sinking thermals, right? Nighttime, early morning, right? When the sun rises, you're going to have those rising thermals up the hill, right? Up the slopes. But in the tight, broken terrain where a lot of funnels form, air doesn't always move in straight lines. It swirls, splits, and slides along contours. The more complex the terrain, the more unpredictable those shifts can be. If you've ever had elk coming in perfectly and then watch them stop, lift their noses, and fade away without a sound, you've seen how unforgiving bad wind can be. The best way to manage it is to plan for consistency, but not perfection. Study how the wind moves in that specific funnel before you ever hunt it. Drop milkweed or puff powder at different times of the day and watch how it flows. Take note of how the sun angle changes and when thermals begin to reverse. You're going to often find that certain spots within a funnel hold more stable air than others. Those are your ambush zones. Sometimes moving just 20 yards can put you in a completely different wind line. If you can find a position where the air drifts steadily in one direction, even at low speed, you're in a better spot. Timing and wind are also tied to temperature swings. On crisp mornings with little sun, it's going to take longer for those thermals to start to rise, right? Keeping your scent low longer. On hot afternoons, they flip quickly, pushing air upward within minutes of direct sunlight hitting a slope. You can use those moments to your advantage. For example, if you know elk will be moving uphill to bed around mid-morning, you can set up in the lower half of a funnel while thermals are still dropping. As the sun warms and thermals shift upward, your scent's going to rise above the trail just as the elk move through. Getting that timing right often means the difference between a blown stalk and a perfect broadside shot. Wind doesn't just affect scent either. It also dictates how elk choose to travel. They instinctively move into the wind whenever possible. In funnels that connect open and timbered areas, they're going to often use side hill angles or alternate routes that keep the wind in their face. When you're scouting or e-scouting, try to visualize how the wind interacts with terrain from an elk's perspective. They're rarely going to move blindly into unpredictable air currents, and if they do, it's usually at night. During daylight, they trust their nose. The moment the wind becomes inconsistent, they're going to stop using that funnel altogether until conditions improve. Mastering timing and wind, it takes repetition, right? Every time you hunt a funnel, you're going to learn a little bit more about how air moves through it and when elk feel comfortable traveling there. Keep notes. Pay attention to temperature, wind direction, and the exact minute of movement. Over time, you're going to start to see patterns. When you can predict not just where elk will move, but when and under what wind, you're no longer reacting. You're hunting with precision. And that's when you're going to stop being in the right place by accident and start being there by design. Once you've found a good funnel, studied the wind, and dialed in your timing, the next challenge is how to actually hunt it. Some days the best move is to sit still and let the elk come to you. Other days it's to move quietly through the funnel itself, reading sign as you go and adapting in real time. Both approaches can work, but success depends on understanding what kind of movement the elk are using and how much pressure the area has seen. The balance between patience and movement is everything. When you're in high traffic elk country, places where multiple trails converge or fresh sign tells you they're using the funnel daily. Your best play is an ambush setup. Find a point that covers the greatest number of those intersecting trails without compromising your wind or visibility. This might be a small rise above the trail, the shadowed side of a bench, or the corner of a drainage where elk naturally pause to look ahead. Elk often move through funnels cautiously, especially after the rut, and they're going to stop to check their surroundings before committing to open ground. That hesitation is your window. Having a clear shooting lane into that pause zone gives you the best odds for a clean shot. If you're still hunting, your mindset has to shift. You're not covering country, you're dissecting it. You've got to move like you expect an elk to appear at any moment. Take a few steps. They've got to be slow steps, right? Stop and scan. Let your eyes lead before your feet follow. In funnels thick with cover, you're going to often catch elk first by color or movement. Maybe a flash of tan hide through the timber or the swing of an antler tip in the shadows. The slower you move, the more you're going to see, and it's going to play out to your favor to see them before they see you. If you think you're going slow enough, cut that speed in half. Still hunting isn't about distance, it's about awareness. When you're hunting a funnel where elk might already be bedded, sound discipline becomes critical. Every noise you make should sound like it belongs. Step on dirt or grass, not sticks or rock. Use the natural cover of the terrain, wind gusts, bird calls, shifting leaves, whatever you have, to mask your movement. Never fight the rhythm of the country. Match it. Elk live in tune with their environment, and anything out of sync puts them on edge. If a bull suddenly stops feeding and looks up, you've got to freeze if you're able to see him, right? Let the mountain settle, move again on your stalk, right? Only when everything feels in control and normal. Reading fresh sign also helps guide how aggressive you can be. If droppings are still wet, tracks are sharp, and bark from rubs looks freshly peeled, you're in the right zone. That's when you can move slower and expect elk to be close. If the sign looks older, you can be a bit more free, right? Using the funnel to relocate rather than to ambush. The most productive funnels are often used for generations, and you're going to know you found one when you start noticing layers of sign, right? Fresh tracks over old ones, rubs of different ages, trails that look worn into the landscape. Those are the places worth returning to again and again. When elk finally appear, patience is what seals the deal. Don't rush the moment. Elk that move through funnels are naturally alert because funnels are their transitions between zones. They're on the move, but not relaxed. So wait for them to commit fully to the funnel before making any adjustments. A drawn bow too early or a sudden shift of weight can catch their attention faster than sound. So you've got to let them past your first shooting lane if it means getting a steadier, higher percentage shot in the next one. Timing and restraint are what turn opportunity into success here. If you're rifle hunting, the same principles apply. Set up where you can see the greatest number of trails and stay ready without fidgeting. Try to make sure that you're always using a good rest whenever possible, and think through your shot angles before elk appear. If you're bow hunting, make sure your rangefinder readings are done in advance, right? Know them. Mark your reference points so you don't have to move when the moment comes. The less motion you make, the more likely it is that the elk will never know you were there until it's too late. Still hunting and ambushing funnels both demand mental toughness. You might sit for hours without seeing a thing or move through a drainage for an entire morning before you find fresh sign. But that's the nature of this kind of hunting. It's built on trust. You trust your read of the land, the wind, and the rhythm of the elk. You trust that patience will pay off. And when it finally does, when the herd slips quietly through that narrow draw or a bull steps into your shooting lane, you're going to know it wasn't luck. You read the mountain right. You moved with purpose and earned the outcome through discipline. That's the essence of hunting these areas smart. Using natural funnels when elk travel between habitats is one of the most reliable ways to turn scattered country into predictable hunting ground. Elk might seem random when you're chasing sign or calling blindly, but their movement is never accidental. The terrain guides them. Once you learn how to read those ridges, saddles, benches, and drainages the way the elk do, you're going to stop hunting by chance and start hunting by design. You begin to see how everything connects. The feed that pulls them out of the timber, the bedding cover that draws them uphill, and the narrow corridors that link all of it together. When you set a funnel long enough and finally watch elk appear exactly where you expected, something changes. You stop second guessing your instincts. You realize the mountain has patterns, and success isn't about luck, it's about alignment. It's about putting yourself in the right place at the right time with the right wind and letting the natural behavior of elk do the rest. Funnels teach you patience, observation, and precision. They reward those who slow down, trust their preparation, and believe in their ability to read country at a higher level. So the next time you're e-scouting or hiking into new ground, don't just look for elk. Look for the places that move elk. Because once you start focusing on how they travel instead of where they stand, you're going to find yourself in the right position more often than not. And that's the difference between a hunter hoping for a break and one who consistently creates opportunity. If you're serious about taking this kind of knowledge deeper, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than just a membership. It's a way to sharpen your edge with exclusive tools, strategies, and a tribe of hunters who refuse to quit. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, a member-only t-shirt shipped to you every single month, not available anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault of guides, checklists, fitness programming, backcountry strategies, and mindset training, a private Facebook group with direct access to me and a community of driven hunters who live relentless, direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or just sharpening your edge, and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. This is built for the guys who train for the hunt, push themselves in the off season, and want to be part of a tribe that makes them better. If you're ready for that kind of inner circle, then Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.